Imagine your manager calls you into their office, says they need to talk about your performance. You walk in. There are 2 chairs. You sit in one. Your manager's brother is tied to the other one. That was a regular Tuesday for everyone who worked for Cleopatra. She ruled Egypt for 22 years, spoke 9 languages, was personally richer than most modern countries. She sat across the table from Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, the 2 most powerful men alive, and walked away from both meetings getting exactly what she wanted. She also had her sister killed, poisoned her brother, dissolved a $5 million pearl in vinegar, and drank it to win a dinner bet, and somehow convinced 2 of Rome's greatest generals to throw away their entire careers over her. If she were alive today, she would be your CEO. Your LinkedIn would describe working for her as an incredible learning experience. You would be lying. Cleopatra became queen at 18. Her father had just died. Egypt was supposed to be co-ruled with her little brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was 10 years old. Think about that for a second. The fate of the richest country in the ancient world was technically in the hands of a 10-year-old. His advisors decided Cleopatra was the real problem and kicked her out of Egypt entirely. A normal person at this point writes strongly worded letters, maybe hires a lawyer, spends 3 years building a case. Cleopatra raised an army in Syria, smuggled herself back into the royal palace rolled up inside a carpet, tumbled out directly in front of Julius Caesar, and had him completely on her side within 48 hours. Caesar backed her. Her brother's army collapsed. Ptolemy XIII fled on a boat. The boat sank. He drowned. Cleopatra was 21 years old. In 3 years, she had survived a coup, won a civil war, secured an alliance with the most powerful man on earth, and quietly eliminated the only person who could challenge her throne. Most people at 21 are still figuring out how to do laundry. Julius Caesar was 52. He had just finished conquering half the known world. He was the most powerful man alive, and he knew it. Cleopatra was 21. Her country owed money to Rome. She had just been chased out of her own palace by a child and his handlers. A normal person in this situation sends a very polite letter requesting a formal meeting, prepares talking points, arrives on time, tries not to make it weird. Cleopatra had herself physically smuggled inside a rolled carpet past Caesar's guards, unrolled herself in his private chambers at midnight, and walked out the next morning with Rome's full military support. Not a cold email, a carpet. At midnight. It worked. She spent the next 2 years living in Rome as Caesar's partner, had his son, convinced him to put a golden statue of her, a foreign queen, inside the Temple of Venus in the center of Rome, got Egypt's debt to Rome significantly reduced. Then Caesar got assassinated on the floor of the Senate. Most people would call that a catastrophic setback. Their most powerful ally, dead. Their entire strategic position, gone. Cleopatra took 2 years, identified the next most powerful man in Rome, got herself invited to meet him in the city of Tarsus, showed up on a golden barge with rose petals scattered across the deck, servants dressed as gods rowing the oars, and herself dressed as Isis, the goddess of literally everything Egyptians cared about. Mark Antony abandoned his wife, his political duties, and most of his common sense that same week. Plutarch, who was not easily impressed, wrote that her charm was irresistible, and that every person who encountered her fell under it immediately. Some historians call this manipulation. Others call it the most effective diplomatic strategy in the ancient world. They are both describing the same thing. Here is the part about Cleopatra that history class completely skipped. She was brilliant. Not charming and gets away with it, brilliant. Actually, demonstrably, provably brilliant. She spoke 9 languages: Egyptian, Greek, Latin, Aramaic, Ethiopian, Hebrew, Arabic, Parthian, and Median. The Ptolemaic dynasty, her family, had controlled Egypt for 250 years before she was born. In those 250 years, not a single ruler had learned to speak Egyptian. Her family ran the country for 2.5 centuries without ever speaking to its people in their own language. Cleopatra learned Egyptian, showed up at temples, participated in local religious ceremonies, and was the first ruler in the dynasty's entire history to actually feel like an Egyptian to the Egyptians themselves. She ran her own intelligence network across the Mediterranean. She personally managed military alliances with multiple competing Roman factions simultaneously. She oversaw trade negotiations, grain production, treasury management, and foreign policy at the same time, while raising 4 children, while being the head of state of the wealthiest nation in the world. At 30 years old, your manager complains about having too many Zoom calls. But here's the other side of the management style. Her sister Arsinoe made the mistake of publicly claiming she should also be queen. Cleopatra had her assassinated inside a temple in Ephesus, an act so brazen it shocked even Caesar, a man who had enslaved entire populations without losing sleep over it. Her brother-husband Ptolemy XIV died shortly after, under circumstances nobody investigated, because nobody wanted to be the person who investigated. She was her own HR department. She was her own legal team. She was her own everything. If you had a problem with how things were run, you had a problem with Cleopatra personally. And that was not a conversation most people survived. At some point during her years with Antony, Cleopatra made a bet. Antony's circle was famous for their parties. They had a whole club dedicated to competitive feasting, which is genuinely one of the most Roman things that has ever existed. Cleopatra told him she could throw a single dinner that cost more than his entire club spent in a year. Antony laughed. He bet against her. At the dinner, Cleopatra ordered a glass of vinegar brought to the table. She took off one of her pearl earrings, reportedly worth 10 million sesterces, somewhere around 5 million modern dollars, dropped it into the vinegar, waited for it to dissolve, and drank it. Antony conceded. She won. Now, to be honest, pearls don't dissolve easily in vinegar. Most historians think this story is at least partly legend. But here's what matters. This is the story Cleopatra wanted told about herself. That she was so wealthy, she could dissolve jewelry as a dinner party trick. That she could spend $5 million to win a bet and feel nothing. That is not an accident. That is branding. Meanwhile, the Egyptian treasury was quietly funding all of Antony's military campaigns, his failed invasion of Parthia, his conquest of Armenia, his entire eastern operation. The richest country in the ancient world was being used as a personal bank account for a Roman general's imperial ambitions. She was the investor. He was the startup founder. And the startup kept losing wars. She kept writing the checks. By 31 BC, they were at war with Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, the man who would eventually become Augustus, and the man who was going to win. At the Battle of Actium, their combined fleet was losing. Cleopatra's ships withdrew. Antony, watching her leave from the deck of his flagship, abandoned his fleet and followed her. He left his own battle, in the middle of it, losing, to follow a woman who was already sailing away. The fleet surrendered without him. The war ended shortly after. Octavian's forces swept into Egypt. Antony received false information that Cleopatra was dead. He killed himself. Octavian captured Alexandria. He offered Cleopatra terms, her life, in exchange for being paraded through the streets of Rome as a trophy in his victory procession. Cleopatra looked at those terms and decided no. She died on August 12th, 30 BC, alone in her tomb, dressed in full royal regalia. Whether it was a snake or poison, the choice was entirely hers. Octavian reportedly wept when they found her, not out of grief. She had just robbed him of his greatest prize, and there was nothing he could do about it. She negotiated the terms of her own death, and won. Here is the thing about Cleopatra that nobody taught you in school. Everything you know about her was written by her enemies. Octavian won the war. The writers who survived worked for Octavian, and Octavian needed the story of the woman who had allied with his greatest rival to look a very specific way. The seductress who destroyed great men. The foreign queen who used her beauty as a weapon. The irrational woman who let emotion guide her decisions. That story was written by the people who beat her. The real version looks different. A polyglot scholar who kept the most strategically vulnerable nation in the Mediterranean independent for 22 years through diplomacy, intelligence, and political maneuvering at a time when Rome was systematically absorbing everything around it. She lost eventually, but she lasted 2 decades longer than any rational military analysis would have predicted. 2,000 years later, every person on Earth knows her name. We don't know Octavian. We know Augustus, the name he gave himself after he won, because he needed a grander title to feel like he had actually beaten her. She made the man who defeated her rename himself to feel important. From the grave. 2,000 years ago. That's not losing. That's the longest-running performance review in human history, and she's still winning it. Next week, the Maya had a performance review system. The termination rate was 100%. If this video made you feel better about your own boss, subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it means a lot. If it made you feel worse, also subscribe. You deserve to feel seen.